We're talking today to Jock Bartley of Firefall. They have a new album out. It's called Comet. Comes out on Friday, December 11th. Sunset Boulevard Records. And I'll start by saying, well, first off, which time zone are you in right now as we're talking?
I'm in Colorado, so I'm mountain, and I'm 1 hour earlier than you.
Okay, so it is afternoon. I'm afternoon as well, but I will tell you I did have my morning coffee and is literally still here in the mug here in the studio. I see that's a definite thing on the Firefall Facebook page if anyone sees that. And it's a Monday morning, and I did have my coffee as well, so I'm properly set for the interview today.
Me too.
That's good. The first album since 1994, correct me if I'm wrong?
That sounds about right, and it felt like it was about time. You know, it'd been a really long time. We have 3 original members in the band, myself, Mark Andes on bass, and David Muse on sax, flute, and keyboards. And we've been playing, of course, not now in the pandemic, but we've been playing a lot on the road for the last 10 years, and it just really seemed like we had some new material brewing, and Firefall was playing the classic song by Spirit, Nature's Way, which is, we have our version of that on our record. And it just seemed like it was time to maybe go in the studio and try to put a new album together a few years ago.
Yeah, I remember seeing you guys along with Pure Prairie League. You were in Eau Claire at the old State Theater, the Eau Claire Regional Arts Center back, I want to say it was January of 2015. I think so. It was right about that time. So that wasn't too long, correct me if I'm wrong, after the current iteration kind of solidified that particular lineup. So at that point, were you guys already, even right around then, thinking, maybe we can do a new tune here, maybe we can record a song there, even at around that point of that tour?
What year was that you just mentioned?
I think it was January of 2015, I think is when that show was.
No, I think that about 2016, 2017, we started thinking, gosh, maybe we should cut a new album. Now, of course, radio's totally changed these days, and bands like us probably will never have a hit song again. But, we really were writing new music, and we're really excited about a couple of things we were doing other than just playing on the road and going and playing our 1970s hits that everybody expects. And, so probably about 2016 and into 2017, we started talking about the album, writing songs, looking for outside songs. And it took a long time to get it together because we all live in 5 different states. And, to get a 3 or 5 day stint in a practice room or a studio was really hard to do, because what we would do mostly would be we would, fly away to a city or 2 cities and fly home after playing the gigs there. And there really wasn't a whole lot of time for recording. So it was a challenge on that, and that added to the length of time that the album took to make. But we're really happy with it now. I think there's some great songs. It sounds like Firefall should sound, I think, and I've been told by a lot of people that it sounds really good. We sound familiar enough to where, half the songs on the record really sound like Firefall, many years later. Mm-hmm. But we also have some songs that kind of stretch the boundaries a little bit. So we're excited about it.
Yeah, the variety of songwriting leads to different sounds without necessarily going like, oh, wow, where did this left turn come from? Your writing is on there. Gary Jones's writing is on there. There's that song. Okay, Sandy Ficca had the Hardest Chain is what I'm referring to. And that one goes back 13 years from now anyway. Is that a song that he and Tony Rosario had sitting around? What was the history of that tune, and why did you guys bring that one in?
When we started looking within the band at any songs that were available, Sandy presented that one, and he and Tony wrote that song, 10 or 12 years ago. And, I remember we had thought about making a record 10 years ago, and we had listened to that song. We were kind of familiar with it. But, it doesn't matter when a song was written. If nobody's heard it or if it was never on an album, it's a brand new song. So when we started in earnest rehearsing songs for the new record, Sandy presented that one again, and it was really good because that's one of the ones that sound kind of like Firefall, with acoustic guitars and vocals and stuff. As leader of the band, I really wanted to have at least half of the record, sound like a band named Firefall's supposed to sound, which was back to the 70s with acoustic guitars and melodic music and great vocals, and also my lead guitar and David's sax and flute interacting at times. So, Sandy's song and also my song, A New Mexico, are put on the record because they're good songs and vibrant now today, but they also sound like Firefall's supposed to sound, I think.
It's fun listening back and forth between Mexico and A New Mexico, and the kind of the wordplay in the new one as well. So this is, it's essentially a sequel to something from 4.5 decades earlier. Now here's the next part of the story. So what led you to write the lyrics and the story in the follow-up?
Well, it's funny because, for years I was saying to myself and the rest of the guys in the band, we need to sound like Firefall in a lot of the songs. Like, I think we need a New Mexico. And I was talking about a newer version of that kind of song, Mexico. And I said that so many times, a New Mexico, that, that it kind of finally clicked with me. And I went, heck, I should just write a song called A New Mexico or New Mexico. So, yeah, it's about a guy, who has a girlfriend now, and Mexico for him has changed, whereas the year before, in the second verse, when he was in Mexico by himself, he was all alone and really bummed out. And things have totally changed because he has a woman in his life now. And so I just wrote that one and kind of thought, where is this going to go? Because I knew I wanted to play those kind of signature Jock Bartley guitar licks on it.
Yeah, hear that right there. Again, what you were saying about what sounds like Firefall, that definitely does. That musically, and obviously the lyrics too, but especially in that one, you're going, okay, yep, definitely. You're like, I've heard this song somewhere, and obviously we know which one it is, but it really comes out in that tune.
Yeah, and we have fun. We had fun playing that, and when I presented it to the guys in the band, there was a bunch of laughter around. It's like, oh, okay, but then they realized that it was also a good song, and if it sounded good when we were done recording it, would had a chance to make the record too. So there's a lot of songs on there. Our new single, of course, is Way Back When, and I wrote that trying to think about how to portray how amazing and great the music of the late 60s was. And once I wrote the first verse about what the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the Byrds and Bob Dylan, the whole tone was set on that song, kind of because, boy, that music of the late 60s set up the 70s, where Firefall, of course, became more prominent, and bands like, the Eagles and Dan Fogelberg and Little River Band and all those great bands of the 70s, we got our start from how great the music was in the 60s.
I think it's safe to say then if not for that period of music, Firefall doesn't exist.
That's true. And without Rick Roberts and Larry Burnett, the original singer-songwriters in Firefall, we wouldn't have existed either, because in my mind, a band has to have great songs to even have a chance at getting on the radio or becoming a gold or platinum record act. There's hundreds of thousands of great guitar players around, and there's a lot of bands that groove a lot. But boy, without the songs, Firefall would have been nothing. And, our first album, it was interesting because when Mark Andes, myself, and Rick Roberts first started getting together to rehearse, and it felt like a band, Rick said, I know this guy Larry Burnett in Washington, D.C., and here's a couple of songs on tape that he's written, and the first song Mark and I heard was Cinderella, and we all went, get him out here to Colorado. And when we had our first day of practice for a new band, which of course didn't have a name yet, we had 20 or 25 original songs to play from the first day of practice on, which, as me as a player and Mark Andes is a great bassist, it was just phenomenal, and we were in hog heaven to have that many great songs to start with.
It's a solid, and anyone listening who has not heard the first album or really the first few albums, give them all a listen. To really establish the Firefall sound, besides especially the three big hit singles you mentioned, obviously Rick Roberts and everyone who's been in the band. But there's a lot of guests who are on this new album who were in, as it says, formerly of Firefall. That's what struck me as I'm looking through the liner notes, which, by the way, thank you guys for putting on detailed liner notes. I love that, getting specifically who played what, where. That's great. Oh, my.
Well, I'm an old school guy, Luke, and, when you got an album or even a CD from a few years ago, you wanted to, find out who was on it, and my manager and our record label was saying, nobody cares about where the studios were or who played on what. And I said, I don't agree with that. So I'm glad that you're telling me that you like a little bit of in-depth information on the liner notes.
Absolutely.
And, and like, for instance, when we decided to record Nature's Way, the Randy California song from 1970, which was kind of an environmental anthem song back in the end of the hippie days. Mark Andes asked Timothy B. Schmidt from the Eagles if he, want to sing on the song, and Timothy said, yeah, and loved the band spirit back in the days. And he said, yeah, and then suddenly that brought in John McPhee from the Doobie Brothers, so we had a couple of very notable guest stars appearing on that song.
Yeah, and especially like how the is lowercase and the Doobie Brothers is capitalized. That's a very particular thing that stood out. Like, yep, because Eagles, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's supposed to be just that for the band. I've never really known that for sure, but that's what I've always understood, that Eagles is just that. It's not the Eagles, it's just Eagles. Right. But to make it sound appropriate, then people will throw the before that.
Right. And you know what? I'm sure that they don't mind because, the Eagles were and still are probably the biggest successful band in that genre of music from Southern California, that Firefall, it plays a small role in that genealogy tree. But, it's really great having some guest appearances.
Well, and
I was going to say John Jorgensen, who played in Elton John's band and also the Desert Rose Band with Chris Hillman from the Byrds. He played 12-string guitar on Way Back When, so it's really cool. And you know what? With Steve Weinmeister and Jim Waddell and people who have been in Firefall in the past 15 or 20 years as members when the band changed a little bit, I wanted to acknowledge that.
That's the thing, because it really stood out. If going through even going through the history of the band and who's played with whom at different times, and that sparked up a little bit in my mind reading the liner notes and going, it's almost like a family with this band. And I don't usually see that with groups that get back. Sometimes, but not often will I see a group that's been around a while have a lot of former members come back in, just play a little bit here, a little bit there. Is that a correct way to assess kind of the feeling around members of Firefall, that if you've been in, you kind of are a member, even if you're not officially in the band at a given moment?
Yeah, that's pretty true in our case. And Steve Weinmeister, for instance, he was the lead vocalist for 23 years in the 80s and 90s and into the 2000s before Gary Jones joined the band as lead vocalist. And so that's kind of true, but it also kind of harkens back to that Southern California music that started with the Byrds and the Buffalo Springfield and evolved into the Eagles and Crosby, Stills and Nash and Lockins and Messina, and later at the top branches of that tree, Firefall. You know, it was amazing back in those days that so many bands and members kind of intermingled. You know, like I think about the Byrds, and I played with Graham Parsons and Emmylou Harris at the Fallen Angels for their last tour before Graham made the second record and then ended up dying out at Joshua Tree. But, you know, the whole Flying Burrito Brothers, Byrds connection, really cool stuff. So it was like a big family. And what was interesting for me, I've always lived in Colorado pretty much. And in about 1972 to 73, a lot of the Southern California big-name rock stars who got sick of living in L.A. moved to the mountains above Boulder, including Stephen Stills and Chris Hillman and Richie Fury and Joe Walsh and Dan Fogelberg and Carl Wilson of the Beach Boys. And suddenly Boulder, for about 5 or 6 or 7 years, became a national hotbed of music.
How would you say Comet fits in the Firefall discography?
I would say that it fits very nicely, and that's kind of surprising for us not having a new album out for 20 years or whatever it is. And me having been in the band from the very beginning, you know, I knew how to make Firefall sounding records. And I knew the kind of groove that people were used to hearing from us, you know, and it wasn't just acoustic guitars, and it wasn't just love songs like Just Remember I Love You or You Are the Woman or stuff. There was a whole vibe about the band, and we were unique. We sounded pretty distinctive, which was fortunate. And, you know, when we went in and started seriously recording this record, I wanted to really keep that in mind and make it so that we didn't sound like a brand new band, you know. A band that didn't sound like Firefall shouldn't be calling itself Firefall. So we're still really true to what our founding music was like. And I'm really glad that I'm hearing from radio people and friends and people who've heard the record that, you know, it's a great Firefall record, and it continues the tradition of melodic music that you know, the people like to hear and enjoy hearing.
And I would affirm that as well. It's called Comet. It comes out on Friday, December 11th. If anyone's listening before December 11th, it's coming out. Otherwise, if you're listening to this afterwards, well, it's out on Sunset Boulevard Records. It's got Comet Neo-wise. I could immediately identify that kind of double thing coming out of the top. I'm like, that's got to be the Comet from this summer, and that's the one on the cover of the album. Am I correct on that?
You are, and it was funny. You know, as an artist and a graphic designer, and I helped pretty much design the cover and all that stuff, I had about 5 or 6 Comet pictures that I thought would look good on the cover, but 2 or 3 of them we couldn't get a hold of the photographer to okay us using his shot on the album or pay him some money for the rights to that. And once Lynn saw this cover that we're on there, he says, that's the one. And we knew who the photographer was, and he is the record label, got a hold of him and cut the deal. And I love it. I love our new cover.
It looks really good. So that if someone's looking for a way, where's the new Firefall album? And besides looking for the logo, look for the one album that's got the Comet on the cover, and that's definitely the one. It's coming out soon. It sounds really good. I would encourage anyone to give it a listen. Jock Bartley, thanks for taking some time to chat with us about the band and about the album, and best of luck on the promotion of this and when you guys eventually get back out on tour performing this live and everything going down the road.
We'll come see you. So thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And you can go catch on firefallofficial.com all kinds of stuff about the band. So thanks for having me on, Luke, and have a great week in Wisconsin.